still get to be a perfectionist, which is not a bad thing. And I would argue is a wonderful, beautiful quality. And you get to understand how to stay on the healthier side of things. No one gets it right all the time. That's okay.
Welcome to Season of Stuck, the podcast that takes a deep dive into the all too human experience of feeling stuck. I'm your host, Deanna, deBara, and on this podcast, we explore all things stuck. How and why stuckness happens, what it feels like, how to learn and grow from it, and ultimately, how to get unstuck and move forward in an authentic, empowered way. If you are looking for insights, support, and community as you make your journey from stuck to unstuck, you're in the right place. Now, let's jump into today's episode. Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to another episode of Season of Stuck. I'm your host, Deanna. If this is your first time listening, welcome. This is a podcast about the oh-so-human experience of feeling stuck. So if you've ever felt stuck, which, let's be real, who hasn't? You are in the right place. And if this is not your first time listening, welcome back. I can't tell you enough how happy and grateful I am that you are choosing to be here. So thank you so much for your support. Okay, so jumping into today's topic. Quick poll. By a show of hands, are there any perfectionists in the house? Now, I know that I can't see you, but if you, like me, have a hand in the air, chances are at some point or another, your perfectionism has made you feel stuck. And that stuckness can show up in a number of different ways. For example, for some people, perfectionism manifests as an itch that can't be scratched. No matter how good things are, they're not perfect. And that can leave you continually dissatisfied, always looking for more. For others, being a perfectionist makes it hard to relax. When quote unquote perfect is the end goal, there's always something else that can be done to get there. And so that knowledge keeps you constantly on your toes, searching for the next step on your quest towards perfection and unable to relax into the step that you're currently in. For some, perfectionism is really about control. You try to do everything perfectly as a way to control the outcomes in your life. But inevitably, you're faced with the truth that being perfect can't protect you from hard things. That being the perfect partner doesn't mean you'll never get divorced. That being the perfect employee doesn't mean you'll never lose your job. That taking perfect care of your health doesn't make you immune to disease. And that truth can feel like a real slap in the face. And for still others, perfectionism feels like an obstacle to overcome. It's a roadblock on your path to leading a happy, healthy, content, and fulfilled life. And until you can figure out a way around that roadblock, you'll never find the happiness or health or contentment or fulfillment that you're looking for. Or if you're like me, it could be all of those things. I for sure have resonated with all of these flavors of perfectionist-related stuckness at one time or another. And I'm not going to lie, at times it's been really frustrating. But all of these challenges, this stuckness that comes along with perfectionism, it could be because the way that we are thinking about perfectionism is all wrong. Perfectionism isn't a problem to be solved. It's just another personality trait. And if you can change the way you think about your perfectionism, get a deeper understanding of how, where, when, and why it shows up, and figure out how to effectively work with it, you can harness your tendency towards perfectionism as a strength and use it to build an amazing, excellent, beautifully imperfect life. And that's what today's guest work is all about. Katherine Morgan Schafler is a psychotherapist and the author of The Perfectionist Guide to Losing Control, a book that challenges the way we look at perfectionism and how we as perfectionists look at ourselves by redefining what it means to be a perfectionist and offering invaluable insights into how to identify, understand, and work with our perfectionism to make it work for us, not against us. During our conversation, Katherine and I take a deep dive into all things perfectionism, including why the way we currently view perfectionism is keeping us stuck, the 5 different types of perfectionism and how they can manifest, and why understanding your perfectionism type and how to work with it is key to living your best life. If you have ever felt shame or frustration or sadness around your perfectionist tendencies, this is definitely a conversation that you will not want to miss. Let's jump into my chat with Katherine. Katherine, welcome to Season of Stuck. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited.
I am excited. This is a topic that is very close to my heart. I have long considered myself a perfectionist to a fault and viewed my perfectionism as an obstacle to overcome. And so I'm really excited to chat with you about looking at perfectionism through a little bit of a different lens. So I guess to kick things off, I would love to know what inspired you to start studying and diving into perfectionism and then ultimately write your book.
Yeah. Well, I've worked as a psychotherapist in a lot of different clinical settings, right? So I used to be the on-site therapist at Google here in New York City, where I live. I worked at a rehab. I had a private practice on Wall Street. I worked in Los Angeles in a residential treatment center for kids who were abused in their family of origin and then again in foster care and became what's known as a ward of the state, which is basically when a judge decides this person is going to be safest under state care. And perfectionism showed up in all of those settings, which surprised me. There was something universal about it, which wasn't being discussed or explored in commercial wellness. And there was also something necessary about it. So it was the thing that when people weren't conscious of it or when they weren't managing it, well, it was a thing that took them down, right? It was like carrying an anvil. And at the same time, it was also this force that helped people pull themselves into a new realm of being, like the next level of themselves. And that's not to say better, it is to say different, like more authentic, more whole, alive, full version of themselves. And so I just started becoming really curious about like what does it mean to endlessly strive for something? What does perfectionism even mean? There's no clinical definition of that word. And I looked into the research and was really surprised to see that there are and have been for decades research terms for healthy kinds of perfectionism and unhealthy types, right? The healthy version is called adaptive perfectionism and the unhealthy version is called maladaptive perfectionism. But like there was just such a stark contrast in the way we talk about perfectionism in sort of our everyday zeitgeisty culture kind of way and the research on it. And all the researchers are in agreement that we're in the infancy of understanding this construct, which is actually really kaleidoscopic, really interesting, like really so much bigger than this little ring box we're trying to put it in. And when we think of perfectionistic behaviors, we think of behavioral stuff. Like I want all the pens in a row, or I want my house to be clean. But what I noticed in my practice and in so many of all these other settings was like perfectionism shows up in all kinds of ways, particularly emotionally, which is invisible, right? So what I mean by that is we have this idea of how we're supposed to be feeling, right? Perfectionism is about chasing an ideal. And it's really an oversimplification to say perfectionists are people who want things to be perfect all the time. They want to look perfect. They want the weather to be perfect. They want everything in their day to go perfectly. Like, that's not true. Perfectionists are really smart people who understand that things don't unfold perfectly in life, but are really confused by the discordance they feel inside of themselves after they intellectually concede to like, okay, I know it's not supposed to be perfect. So why am I still unable to kind of accept something about this? And so with the emotional component and interpersonal components of perfectionism and cognitive versions of like needing to perfectly understand something, understand why we didn't get the job, or understand exactly why that someone broke up with us, or understand exactly like why did this person die. Understand all those things perfectly. Like perfectionism just was everywhere around me all of a sudden. I was like cornered. And the only way out of the corner was to write the book. I also, in my personal life, I had really been striving for things that I thought that I wanted and that I did want in a lot of ways. And just at the exact moment that my career and my personal life and my spiritual life and just like every part of me felt like, yes, I got the thing. Like I was diagnosed with cancer, and in the span of 2 weeks, like I had to say no to these career opportunities that I had spent my whole career working towards. Like I had just been married and I wanted to have kids, and so did my partner, but I didn't have time to freeze my eggs before I had to do chemotherapy. And the doctors were really blunt about like, this is going to reduce your egg count. And so I didn't know like if I could have a kid, or just like everything that I was sure of, kind of that I was working so hard to control, just went away. And I hate that backstory because it's so cliche, but it is also true that I never knew how much I was indexing on control until I lost so much of it. Like if you would have asked me in that moment, are you trying to control your life? I would have been like, no, I'm just really disciplined. That's why I make sure to get up at 4 a.m. every day, no matter whether I went to bed at 2 a.m. or 10 p.m. No, I just really want this career. No, I just really want to be married. I'm in love. That's what you do. You get married. It's like I wasn't consciously thinking about why I wanted what I wanted and what I thought getting what I want would make me feel. And that's what the Perfectionist Guide to Losing Control is really about at the end of the day. It is written in a framework of perfectionism, but it's about this universal question of like, why do you want the thing that you want? What do you think that thing's going to do for you? And do you think that having that is the only route to getting whatever it is that you want to feel or become or do? And the answer to that question is about whether you're in a healthy conscious place or an unhealthy unconscious place.
Mm. There's just so much that you said there that resonated so deeply with me. When you are talking about striving for the ideal and that being
Mm-hmm.
perfectionism, the way that I have always experienced perfectionism is as a gap between my reality and what I view as my potential, as what I view could be my ideal. And that can be healthy or unhealthy. You know, I used to have a problem with drinking when I was in my early 20s. And when I stopped, there was a clear gap between who I was and who I knew I could be. And that drive to fill that gap is what allowed me to build this beautiful, full, fulfilling life. And so for that, I'm grateful. But then there's also this gap of feeling like no matter where I am, there is a gap between here and good enough. And that's where the unhealthy perfectionism can come in, and where I will strive to be more and more and more and more. And it's kind of like a moving target. So it's been interesting to kind of see those two different types of perfectionism and how it can motivate me to, as you say, like step into the next version of myself. And depending on what I'm striving for, it can also hold me back and keep me stuck in the place where I am. And I love that you tied it back to control. Understanding control has been a very big theme for me in recent years. And very similarly to you, if you had asked me 5 years ago if I was trying to control things in my life, I would have said no. But now I realize how much of my behavior, including these more perfectionistic tendencies, is
Mm-hmm.
trying to control for safety, right? Is trying to control the different things in my life and make sure that they are good and solid and perfect so that I am ultimately safe.
Mm.
And it really connects back to that.
Yeah, safety in relationships or in job security, or is there something like marquee moment?
In everything. Like
Mm-hmm.
my control challenges come from this desire for stability because I've had instability in my past. And so I just want things to be steady and
Mm-hmm.
reliable and something that I can count on. And I feel like if I do everything super well, then I can then rely on that relationship, that job, that business to keep me safe moving forward, which again can be a positive or a negative thing.
Yeah. I mean, I relate to that so much. I think so many people do this sense that if I can control things, I can predict things. And if I can predict things, I can increase my sense of safety. Right. And what's interesting about that is when we are not in our power, which I position in the Perfectionist Guide to Losing Control as the opposite of control, really. When we're not in our power, we'll do anything to have control and predictability, including negative things like, well, I'm going to drink, for example, because I know all the bad stuff. This is the devil I know. I know all the bad stuff that's going to come and I know how to handle it and I know how to think about it and I know what it's going to be. So I'm going to choose this because it's like an emotional trick because your emotions don't understand the difference between predictability and safety sometimes. And it's like, well, I can predict it, which means I can control it, which means I'm safe. And of course, that's not true. And yeah, two things came to mind as I listened to you speaking. One, you can't be a perfectionist without being an ambitious person. And so I bring this up in the book, which is like ambitious people always see more ahead of them, more to do than they do behind them. That's what makes you ambitious. And that's not a bad thing. It's not a commentary on your gratitude for all the progress you've made. It's not a commentary on your sense of achievement and pride in all the things that you've done. It's just the mark of an ambitious person that you're like, wow, there's so much more stuff to do. That's a cool quality. And so understanding that that's why you feel that way, like, God, I'm just getting started, not because you don't feel necessarily like you've done enough or that you're going fast enough or whatever else, but just because you're ambitious, right? And then, the other thing about perfectionism that I think is really misunderstood is that when we hear like we're all striving for an ideal, we tend to think of that in a simplified, generic way. Perfection, as in nothing is bad, everything's good, nothing's wrong. I got the thing, there were no hiccups. And what I discovered about perfectionism was that it's incredibly individualized, right? So your version of what the perfect mom might be wouldn't be this generic version where, oh, the mom never gets mad and she's so loving and patient all the time and she's able to provide all the creative, intellectual, emotional stimulation that her child needs at all times and whatever. That's not the ideal that actually shows up in people's minds, hearts, souls. The ideal is some individualized version of like, of course, no one's perfect. Like it's okay to get mad, but it's not okay to get mad that my kid isn't tying their shoe. That's not good. Or it's not okay to get this mad about that. And we just kind of set these dials without realizing it and rules about what is okay to feel, when it's okay to feel it, and the degree to which it's okay to feel it, right? That's emotional perfectionism. And it's tricky because we can hold all of those expectations of ourselves and while simultaneously saying like, well, it's not that I want to be perfect. I know perfect doesn't exist. I just want to be a good mom. And it's like really creating a difference between what is the ideal for you and what happens when you don't achieve that. Like, the spine of the book is like, do you punish yourself or are you compassionate with yourself? Because you're not going to achieve it. Because as all healthy perfectionists know, ideals are not meant to be achieved. They're meant to inspire. That's their only function. And unhealthy perfectionists in a maladaptive mindset conflate goals and ideals so that they're one and the same. And we sometimes don't understand the power of self compassion because we're emotionally illiterate in this country. We don't teach emotional education in our schools in the same way we teach physical education. It's not a public health priority. It will be soon. We'll get there, but we're not there yet. So we don't know what the difference between like self-worth and self-esteem is, right? Or dignity and respect, or compassion and just being really polite with yourself. Like there are marked differences between these things. These are powerful resiliency building mindsets and skills. And if you don't know what they are, it all turns to soup in your head.
There are so many different ways to go from stuck to unstuck. But one of the most productive, learning. Learning something new can help you expand your skill set and find new interest, and in the process, help you get unstuck. And if you want to learn something new, you will definitely want to check out Skillshare. Skillshare is an online learning community that offers thousands of classes designed to help you learn, grow, and tap into your creativity, all of which can help you make the journey from stuck to unstuck. And right now, Skillshare is offering a free month to new members. If you want to access Skillshare's entire library of classes and get the education and instruction you need to shake off the stuckness, just visit seasonofstuck.com/Skillshare and sign up for your free trial today. Again, that's seasonofstuck.com/Skillshare. There is such a difference in responding to yourself when you fall short of a set ideal from a shame-based place versus a compassion-based place, where when you show yourself compassion, that's where you can identify what you would have liked to have done better and give yourself a little bit of love, give yourself a little bit of grace, and then choose to make a different decision later. Whereas with shame, when you come after yourself and berate yourself for where you fell short, then you just get stuck in that place, because shame is, I would argue, the least motivating emotion that we feel. It's so heavy and sticky and hard to move through. So I love that idea of healthy perfectionism being responding in a more compassionate way to yourself.
Yeah. I mean, I say this in the book, like perfectionism is zero people's problem. Perfectionism is not the problem. The problem is how you respond to your perfectionism, right? I think of perfectionism in the same way, like a perfectionist is an enduring identity marker, right? Which the research backs this up. People who identify as perfectionists identify to that identity throughout their whole lifetime. It's just like people who think of themselves as an artist or an activist or a romantic, right? Being a romantic is not the problem. The problem is you don't have boundaries around your romanticism. And that is going to get you in some trouble. You know, it's like this idea that the self-compassion over punishment idea doesn't really click in with perfectionists sometimes, because perfectionists really want to be accountable. And we don't understand, again, it's an emotional literacy issue, the difference between punishment and personal accountability, discipline, natural consequences, and rehabilitation. Those four things that I just mentioned, they work to help pivot negative behavior and get you on the right track. Punishment never works. Punishment not only never works, it makes everything worse. And if you think about it, the times that you've made the boldest, strongest, healthiest decisions, you've made them because you feel strong and you're connected to some version of identity of yourself, which is healthy and good and deserves good things. That's what being self-compassionate with yourself does. And self-compassion, I use Dr. Kristen Neff's framework, which is based on 3 different tenets. One of them is mindfulness. You know, you got to acknowledge you're in pain in the first place before you can meet yourself with some kindness. Another one is kindness, and another one is common humanity, right? And so again, we don't know that self-compassion is a resiliency building skill that has 3 specific steps that you can take that don't have to be iterative, and you don't have to do them all for it to move the needle. Like, we don't know that stuff. And once you do know that stuff, it just unlocks so much, because you still get to be your full whole self. You still get to be a perfectionist, which is not a bad thing. And I would argue is a wonderful, beautiful quality. I've always been drawn to what I view as like magnetic kind of energy around perfectionists. And you get to understand how to like stay on the healthier side of things. No one gets it right all the time. That's okay.
So let's talk about that for a second. So I love this idea of perfectionism being a strength and this beautiful magnetic quality versus a problem to solve. But I know for myself, I also sometimes feel stuck by my perfectionism, right? Like I can be kind of walled in and it can feel hard to move forward. So, how can people like myself, who sometimes feel stuck in these perfectionistic tendencies, make that shift towards embracing perfectionism as a strength and shift their perspective away from seeing it as a barrier or a weakness?
Yeah, that's a great question. And what my whole book is about, right? Because it's not going to work for you to say, like, how can I stop being a perfectionist? Right? It's like telling a romantic, listen, all you have to do is just stop believing in love 30% of the time, believe in love 70% of the time. It's like it doesn't work like that. So the first thing to do is to understand what perfect even means, right? If you take perfect back to its Latin root, you get per, complete, and facere, done, completely done. So when we say something is perfect, we are describing wholeness and completeness. Okay, that's why we say stuff like, oh, she was a perfect stranger. We don't mean she was a flawless stranger. We mean she was a total stranger to me. She was a complete stranger. And when I listen to people describe quote unquote perfect moments, they're not describing the superficially perfect. They're describing a sense of wholeness. And in fact, usually everything around them is going wrong and it's bad. You know, it's a rainy day, it was a terrible thing, it was this or that or whatever. But yet it felt perfect because they were whole and they were present and they were awake to their own state of wholeness. And when I listen to people describe moments that were supposed to be perfect but weren't, they're describing stilted, superficial perfection amidst a sense of internal fragmentation. They couldn't connect to the person, to the reason, to themselves, like something was fragmented. So, first of all, understanding if you're a perfectionist, it's not that you're obsessed with flawlessness, it's that you're seeking wholeness. And because we're human beings, sometimes we try to take shortcuts to stuff. You know what I'm saying?
Yes, I do.
Sometimes you're like, oh, I really, really want this person to like me. So I'm going to do some people pleasing unconsciously. That's a shortcut that we take to try to get to the thing we actually want, which is not to be liked. It is to have genuine connection, right? Sometimes we're like, I really want to feel peace. So I'm going to clean my kitchen and make it look perfect because then I'll feel peaceful. And we all do this stuff. It's not that big of a deal, right? And so just understanding what it means and what you're after in the first place, and that it's a good thing, and that perfection is coming from inside you. We're already whole. We're already perfect. You don't have to try to become something. You already are. If you think about someone you love and you think about the sound of their laughter, it's perfect. You're not like, oh, that laughter would be perfect if they just rolled the giggle on the end a little bit longer. You know, like, of course not, you know? And so just really reframing your idea of what perfect even means, understanding you're already a whole human being as you are, you're born that way, and understanding the 5 types as I lay them out in the book of perfectionists, that sometimes we can be perfectionistic. Like I said at the top of the conversation, we don't even know we're applying perfectionistic standards because it's such an individualized thing. So I describe 5 different types of perfectionists. I also have a quiz if anyone wants to just do a fun online 1-minute non-empirically based personality quiz. Yeah, so there are 5 different types of perfectionists. And I don't lay out the 5 types of perfectionists to say, here, you better keep tabs on the kind of perfectionist you are so you could be a little less of this. I offer those frameworks to say, just like perfectionism itself, all of these types have advantages and they have liabilities. They have strengths and weaknesses. And if you can understand your strengths and understand where your pain points are, you're going to get a lot more of what you want in life because you're going to be able to offer your strengths as this effortless way to help people and connect and offer support. And you're also going to be able to identify your pain points. And instead of taking this individualistic attitude of, I'm going to churn all my weaknesses into strengths so that I can be good at all things at all times, you just say, oh man, getting started on a project's really hard for me. I'm a procrastinator perfectionist. That's one of the types. Let me reach out to some help on this. And then instead of like trying to change who I am. So it's about strategy and management instead of eradication. It's about integration.
Obviously, you go very in depth in your book into these 5 different types of perfectionists. But can you briefly describe what the 5 types of perfectionists are, the differences between them, and where each type might tend to get stuck?
Sure. So the first is the classic perfectionist. And this is, I think, what we most think of when we think of the archetype of perfectionist. So the pros of classic perfectionists are these are people who do what they say they will do when they say they will do it in the way that they said that they would do it. They're highly reliable. They effortlessly infuse structure into everywhere they go. On the con side, sometimes classic perfectionists don't operate in a spirit of collaboration. And they can kind of take the approach of like, I tell this story in the book of when I was hosting the holidays in an apartment that my sister and I shared in New York City. And she was like, how can I help? I said to her, best way you can help is to just let me do everything. Just like, just let me do it. And like that doesn't necessarily engender connection. So sometimes you can feel like you know a lot about a classic perfectionist or you've known them or worked with them for several years, but you don't really like know them in the sense that you don't necessarily feel connected to them. And on the inside of classic perfectionism, classic perfectionists can feel really taken for granted sometimes because yes, they're the ones who will plan the vacation or make the reservation or create the deck. But just because they like doing it and they can do it well doesn't mean it's not work and doesn't mean that they don't want appreciation for that work. So the next type is the procrastinator perfectionist. And these are all simplified versions of what I talk about in the book, but these are people who basically want the conditions to be perfect before they start. So procrastinator perfectionists on the pros side are just such thoughtful people. They are extremely good at preparing. They can see every situation from a 360-degree angle, and they're not impulsive, which is such an asset which I always wish I had a little bit more of. I can be really impulsive sometimes. On the con side, we all know the cons. It's like you do all this preparing past the point of diminishing returns. And at some point, like you're good, you're ready to go, but you don't actually execute on the thing you're trying to execute on. And that leaves you feeling really deflated. And it creates a self narrative that's not true. It creates a self narrative of like, I'm not disciplined enough. I never do it. I have been thinking about this for 2 years and it says none of that stuff is true. You just need help getting started. That's all. Once a procrastinator perfectionist gets started, they're good to go and they will bring the project to completion beautifully. The counterpart to the procrastinator perfectionist is the messy perfectionist. So these are people who are what I call start happy. They love starting stuff. And I would say they push through the anxiety of a beginning, but there is no anxiety for a messy perfectionist. It's like messy perfectionists are just brimming with ideas about how to do stuff and desires of like, they have their hands in a million pots at once, right? And they have more ideas and energy in the beginning than they know what to do with. So the advantages to that are, of course, just natural enthusiasm. They have no problem getting started and they're just superstar idea generators. On the con side, messy perfectionists, when they hit the middle of the process, where there's that inevitable tedium, where you're like, okay, I started the company and I named the company and I wrote the mission statement of the company, but now I have to file my PLLC with the state and apply for a license. And I don't know how to do that. And this is boring. And this isn't the romantic version of being an entrepreneur that I thought it could be. And it's like when they hit that and it's no longer perfect, sometimes if you're not managing that kind of perfectionism, there's a real struggle to figure out how to get through that moment. And so messy perfectionists can sometimes really struggle to bring things to completion. And they generate the same false narrative as a procrastinator perfectionist does of like, people don't take me seriously enough. I'm not disciplined enough. I must not care enough. All this stuff that's not true. Then we have the intense perfectionist. And the intense perfectionist wants the end of the process to be perfect. So these are people who are focused on the outcome. And the pros of this type are they have razor sharp focus. Unlike other types of perfectionists, they don't care about being liked. So, that tends to lead to being effortlessly direct, right? They're not in a politeness contest with anybody, and they're going to get the job done. The cons are sometimes, if you're not managing this type of perfectionism, you get the job done at the expense of your own well-being and the well-being of those around you. So it's like, great, good job. You met all your Q3 goals. Half your team is going to quit in the next quarter because they're all fucking miserable. It's like short-sighted sometimes if you're not managing it well. And the last one is a really interesting type. It's the Parisian perfectionist. So this type of perfectionism plays out interpersonally. And the most simplified way to say it is Parisian perfectionists want to be perfectly liked. All these types are seeking an ideal. Parisian perfectionists are seeking ideal connection, right? And the advantages to this type are you do not have to explain to a Parisian perfectionist how important relationships are. You have to explain that stuff to some people, like to an intense perfectionist, for example. You have to say, if you continue behaving this way in meetings, people aren't going to want to work for you. You're going to lose your top talent. You have to explain that. You don't have to explain that to a Parisian perfectionist. They just get it. They understand the power of relationships. They're naturally warm, naturally inclusive people. Cons are that sometimes, back to the shortcuts thing we were talking about, Parisian perfectionists can take shortcuts to connection and engage in really toxic people pleasing, in which they pretty much abandon themselves, right? And so all of these types are interesting in that if you understand how perfectionism shows up for you in different contexts, right? Because this stuff is context dependent, meaning you could be a messy perfectionist when it comes to dating. I have friends like this who love the first, second, third date. And then the fourth date hits and they're like, oh, well, I don't know if this is going to work because there's this one problem. Meanwhile, I have friends who are like procrastinator perfectionists when it comes to dating. And they're like, I can't get on this dating app because I don't have the right picture and I need to hire a photographer. And then they hire the photographer and get the picture, but then there's something else that they don't have or that it's not the right time or whatever it is, right? And they're like, get me to 6 months in. That's the part of the relationship I love. I hate the beginning. So we're all different in different ways, in different places. So understanding what your perfectionist profile is can really help you gain awareness of where it's really easy for you to offer help. It's really easy for messy perfectionists to help people who have a hard time getting started, and where you need to ask for help.
I love this framework so much because I feel like it really shows the nuance of what perfectionism is and the different ways it manifests. And I've really only seen perfectionism talked about as kind of like a blanket statement of behavior. And when I was reading your book and going through these different profiles and seeing the different elements that I have in different applications, like I'm a Parisian perfectionist in my relationships, and then I'm more of a procrastinating perfectionist in my work, and just like understanding how these different frameworks apply to my different areas of life. It just gave me such a more in-depth understanding of like where I'm coming from and why I do the things that I do and kind of the motivation behind all of it. So I found it so, so helpful to really like break it down in a more nuanced way.
Yeah. Well, I heard something while I was writing the book. Someone said to me, We write the books we most need ourselves. Like, this is so much a book that I need. It's like all research is me search, that whole thing. It's all true, right? And I'm a messy perfectionist when it comes to work. Like I want to write 1,000 books. Someone asked me recently, so how did you make the decision? It's still funny to even think about. How did you make the decision to publish with a publisher instead of self-publish? And I just could not stop laughing because I was like, I am a messy perfectionist. I can't start a book and not have a team of people around me, including an agent and an editor and like marketing people and all of this stuff to help me bring it to completion. Otherwise, I would never write a book. I would write the first 40 pages of 1,900 books, like it wasn't a decision in my mind. It was just a foregone conclusion. Like, I need a publisher. I need so much help with that part. And the publisher needs me to be the superstar idea generator who can write the book or start the book at least, and then write it with a lot of help from my editor and publishing team.
But then understanding that about yourself, like understanding your type, then allows you to do the things that you want to do by saying, I'm a person that's really good at starting, but I sometimes struggle to then see the project through to the end. So knowing that having a team around you to support you through that process and carry you through the end, then that helps you to reach your ideal and to like work within your type.
Totally. It really changes it for me because now when I experience that tension in the middle, instead of being like, why am I like this? It is, thank God I have so much help around me. And I know people are going to be listening and being like, well, that's nice that you have a whole team around you. I don't have that, but I had to generate that. And so if you're going to put forth work towards managing this stuff, stop hemorrhaging energy trying to be someone you're not and start using your energy to connect to the parts of a process that are hard for you, whatever that process is, whether it's getting sober, writing a book, like becoming someone who's more patient, whatever it is, like we all need help. We all need each other. Healing is not like an individual process. It is a relational process.
And isn't everything just so much better when we do it together? Like, it sounds so corny and cliche to say, but it's so true. Like reaching out, asking for help, getting support, and crossing that finish line with a team or your loved ones or your partner or whoever it is, it just makes everything so much more fulfilling.
So I'm going to be totally honest right now and say that a part of me like recoiled when you said that. Because, well, for a lot of reasons. But one, it's like, I don't like doing everything with everyone. Like, I love solitude. I like a lot of and need a lot of alone time. I'm also sometimes like, I was raised by a lot of British people and have British sensibilities. I was born in London. And so this idea that like, we're better together, like, cool. But also, there's a part of me that is like, sometimes we're better together, right? And other times, and I talk about this in the book too. And it's like this idea, because you're right. I agree with you that reaching out for help does make everything easier. It took me a long time to realize that emotional help is not the only help that you need to reach out for sometimes. And really creating language has always been such a lighthouse for me. I create language around the kind of help I need because I don't like the idea and I recoil at it that like the thing to do when you're stuck is always reach out for emotional support. I know I'm a therapist and that sounds antithetical to what I do for a living, but it's like sometimes that's not the help you need. Sometimes you don't need someone to say, you know what, like I believe in you and you've got this. And if it were easy, then everyone would do it. This is hard for everyone. It's like, I know that already. Okay. Like sometimes the support you need is informational support, right? Sometimes you need, if you are struggling with deciding, for example, whether to stay in a marriage, you need to speak with a mediator or a divorce lawyer about like, what are the top 3 things I should be thinking about or considering right now? How does the law affect my rights to maintain this financial structure or blah, 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 whatever it is, right? Sometimes the help you need is tangible help. right? So I have this line in the book where I say, sometimes we don't reach out to people for emotional support because what are they really going to say in that moment that's going to make us feel or think about the situation differently? Maybe nothing. Maybe you're right about that, but that doesn't mean they can't come over and clean your kitchen. Like sometimes what you need is someone to watch your kids for 3 hours every single Saturday, just so that you know you have that time. Sometimes what you need is financial support, money, right? Like you don't need to talk about your feelings again for the thousandth time. You need money to pay your rent because you got in a car accident 3 months ago and it impacted your insurance fees every month and you're like struggling to reach equilibrium again, whatever it is. There's 6 different types of support that you need. And I think that can be really helpful in encouraging people to reach out for help because if you're like me, and maybe you're not like me, of course, not everyone is, but when it's like, it's okay to ask for help. First of all, I don't like that phrase. But secondly, emotional help's not the only kind of help you can reach out for. And I don't like the phrase, it's okay to ask for help, because there was a point in our culture where we really needed to understand that. And we have progressed a lot, pat ourselves on the back. We've moved past that phase. Okay. And now when you say that to somebody, it's as if like if we were going to a holiday party and I walked in and you were like, just so you know, Katherine, your sweater is not ugly. Okay. I would be like, excuse you, who said my sweater's ugly? Like, but now
Where did that come from?
right. And it's like now all I'm thinking of is like, well, my sweater's not ugly. Okay, good. It's not ugly. And then I have to do the emotional acrobatics to be reassuring myself that it's not ugly and then think like, well, do other people think it's ugly? Like, why would she, it's just like when you frame something from a place of negativity, that's not always the most useful way to phrase it. I think a more helpful phrase is a more helpful reframe is understanding that asking for help is a refusal to give up, right? Like that is a little more empowering. It's a little more accurate. It's a little bit more of like, look, if you don't want to give up, you got to keep asking for help because nobody finishes anything important on their own.
Asking for help is a refusal to give up. I am going to write that on a Post-it note and stick it on my mirror where I can see it every day, because that is such an empowering reframe and makes the asking for help part of the drive and the motivation and the ambition, as opposed to waving a white flag of surrender and saying, I can't do this on my own.
Right. And there's nothing wrong with waving the right flag. I keep a white flag in my pocket, right? Not really, but like metaphorically, like it's okay to be at the point where you're like, I need any kind of help in any kind of measure that you can offer me. Like I surrender, that's okay. But that doesn't have to be the only experience of asking for help. And I offer in the book a whole section on reframes of this, like instead of, for example, I got to fake it till I make it. It's like, well, okay, there's nothing wrong with that necessarily, but what about saying, I am allowing the burgeoning parts of myself to lead? The new parts of myself, I'm going to allow those to lead this week instead of feeling like you're like a fraud until you get some outcome and then you can officially call yourself that thing. It's just reframes are so powerful. So, really thinking about the way we use language and using it in a way that feels most honest and empowering for us is such a great tool.
It is wild how much changing the language and the way that we speak to ourselves can change the way that we feel about what we're saying.
Mm-hmm.
Katherine, thank you. This information has all been so helpful and enlightening and is making me embrace my little perfectionist self just so much harder this morning. So thank you. Here at Season of Stuck, we end the interviews with a question that I would love to ask you, if that's okay, which is thinking about the future version of yourself, right? Like the Katherine that you are growing every day into. If she could travel back in time and talk to the current version of you, what advice would she give you on navigating stuckness at this part of your life?
I think she would probably just offer connection. I don't really think we need advice. I think we all pretty much know what to do. We got to eat 5 fruits and vegetables servings a day. We got to take the stairs. We got to not drink so much. We got to not gossip so much. We all know we're smart. I think where current me might get glitchy is when I disconnect to myself, to other people, to relationships, to the reason I'm actually striving, not just what I'm striving for. So I would just say, stay connected.
I know it's not advice, but what a beautiful thing to think about is just thinking about that connection and that support that our future selves can give us. I love that. Again, Katherine, this has been amazing. If listeners want to connect with you, how can they do that?
So I have a website, which is my name, KatherineMorganSchafler.com. You can subscribe to my newsletter there. I'm on Instagram at Katherine Morgan Schafler. You could take the quiz to find out which type of perfectionist you are. You get a little profile. You get the whole thing at perfectionistguide.com. It's also on my website. And the book is The Perfectionist Guide to Losing Control, A Path to Peace and Power. And those are good starting places, I would say.
Perfect. I am 100% going to take that quiz because I felt like a little Venn diagram of a few different types of perfectionists. So I'm excited to see where I land.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much for being here, everyone. All of you perfectionists out there, go and take the quiz and find out a little bit more about what specific type you are. And we will talk again soon. That's it for today. A huge thank you to our guests for their incredible insights, and a huge thank you to you, our listeners. We know that there are so many podcasts out there to choose from, and we are just so grateful that you chose ours. If you enjoyed today's episode, consider recommending the podcast to a friend or family member that you think would enjoy it. And to make sure that you never miss an episode, subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever it is you get your podcasts. And while you're there, if you loved the show, please consider leaving a 5-star review. It plays such a huge part in getting this podcast out to a wider audience and ultimately supporting more people on their journey from stuck to unstuck. And to keep in touch and access even more stuck-related content, follow us on Instagram at Season of Stuck and visit our website, seasonofstuck.com, where you can sign up to get episodes delivered directly to your inbox. Thank you again for being here. It is so, so appreciated. Until next time, I'm Deanna deBara, and you're listening to Season of Stuck.